What about this one? One SCP researcher called to the other. You've gotta be kidding, his colleague scoffed, interpreting the suggestion as little more than a joke. That thing's a piece of junk. She tapped a knuckle against the glass case, catching the attention of the tiny figure inside.
Who dares?
Exclaimed the tinny, monotone voice.
Release me from this irksome confinement so that I may bring about your final undoing, vermin, for I am DoomBot 2000, the ultimate bringer of destruction.
Both researchers laughed at the small automaton inside the glass. They had come to SCP Item Gallery 27 in search of non-organic anomalies to gather for testing. But judging by their reactions, it seemed that SCP-1370 wasn't going to make the cut. The cobbled-together robot was widely considered to be a harmless, clumsy little oddity, rather than any kind of threat. But that didn't stop SCP-1370 from challenging any and all things around it to a battle to the death. Battles it always lost. This thing is junk, the second researcher remarked, flicking her finger at the glass again in an attempt to startle the robot. It is not organic, though, the other pointed out, observing that SCP-1370 had been constructed out of various recycled parts. Its head was a defunct and non-operational voltmeter, soldered awkwardly onto a weak neck joint. Its arms were wrenches, and it had been configured in such a way that gave the robot a top-heavy, impractical design. Inorganic, yes, but worth our time? Definitely not. Come on, we'll find something else to test in SCP-914. As the pair of researchers turned their backs on SCP-1370, it began to squawk at them again through the speaker embedded in its chest.
You dare walk away from me! You have incurred the wrath of RoboLord the Destructor and will soon be reduced to atoms by my hand!
The tiny junk robot charged towards the two Foundation personnel, only to slam front first into the glass of the display case it was kept contained in. The force of the impact, combined with SCP-1370's imbalanced design, caused it to topple over and land on its back, leaving a huge crack in the glass. Ah, great, one of the researchers sighed, rolling her eyes. We're gonna have to report that SCP-1370's damaged its case again. Come on, let's go and get someone to replace that glass. You think we should just leave it here unsupervised in a damaged case? The other asked. Look at the thing, it's hardly competent enough to escape, the fellow researcher replied, as the tiny robot struggled to get itself back upright. I'm sure it'll be fine for a few minutes. Little did the pair of researchers realize as they left Item Gallery 27 that SCP-1370 had been listening to their conversation, picking up on a few details. While the anomalous automaton often displayed a low level of intelligence and awareness of its surroundings, it was still self-aware, and on top of that, harbored a hatred for all things it believed to be living, although it could be easily tricked and lacked any kind of real fighting ability. But it had picked up on something the researchers had mentioned, an SCP-914. Perhaps through its own limited intelligence or some kind of other anomalous awareness, the tiny robot detected this to mean another machine. And so, standing back up, it struck the glass of its display case again, shattering one side completely. It hopped down to the ground, tumbling over thanks to its lack of balance, only to eventually stand back up and start making its way through the facility. Being only a meter tall made it easy for SCP-1370, otherwise known as Pesterbot, to sneak through the corridors of the Foundation site undetected. It eventually arrived at a room housing a large mass of gears and gyros, a machine filled with clockwork components that seemed to pull the little robot further in as it drew closer and closer to what the researchers had spoken of. SCP-914, the Clockworks, a device that could be used to refine any object placed inside it. Depending on the setting, items could be transformed, destroyed, or vastly improved using the Clockworks. Rough setting disintegrated any test subject, while coarse dismantled it to its base components. 1-to-1 replaced any item with an almost identical copy. Then, the fine setting would cause SCP-914 to improve any item, and very fine could refine an object to an even greater degree, usually by granting it anomalous properties. Testing of all biological matter within SCP-914 was strictly prohibited, but Pesterbot, well, he was made of metal. Sneaking into the room where the Clockworks was located, SCP-1370 immediately caught sight of another Foundation researcher who had been busy overseeing tests using the very fine setting of SCP-914. Instantly, the agitated little robot made a beeline for the researcher, swiping at her ankles with its wrench hands.
Die! Die!
It shrieked.
Cower before the might of my claws. None can stand before the relentless destruction brought forth by Shivatron, despoiler of mirth.
Referring to itself with one of its many elaborate self-appointed titles. Caught by surprise at the tiny robot, the researcher turned and screamed in surprise. Instinctively, she swung her leg back and brought it forward, delivering a swift kick to SCP-1370 that sent its metal body hurtling through the air right into the Clockworks. Pesterbot landed inside the input booth, the enormous collection of clockwork components whirring and heaving as they sprung to life. The researcher hadn't even realized what was happening. She'd been addressing how much her foot hurt after kicking the small metal robot. By the time she looked up, SCP-914 had already fully activated with SCP-1370 inside. In horror, she sounded the alarm to summon security, with no idea what the very fine setting would do to improve Pesterbot. A team of guards filed into the room, drawing their weapons and training them on the output booth of the Clockworks. While they normally would have nothing to fear from SCP-1370, given its inability to ever win in a fight that it started. Even when fighting a potted plant that had been affixed with a speaker, the tiny robot had been bested. But the Clockworks' refinement process meant that what would be stepping out of the machine wouldn't be the Pesterbot the Foundation was familiar with. Sure enough, the heavy foot that came stomping down on the facility floor was a far cry from the flimsy metal limbs SCP-1370 had previously had. Out of the Clockworks emerged a hulking robotic form, not just bigger and bulkier than the meter-tall, clumsy assembled Pesterbot, but a huge, sleek machine built for bear. It was more humanoid, but stood at nearly 7 feet tall. The weight imbalance issues that had plagued the previous design were seemingly gone, as despite its increased size, this new and improved model of SCP-1370 seemed to move fluidly, with smooth electronic motions. The robot turned and assessed its surroundings, scanning the group of Foundation security that had amassed outside SCP-914, its first new targets. As the machine stepped towards them, the security commander gave the word, and the guards opened fire. A hail of gunfire rang out, deafening shots ringing in the security officers' ears as bullets spat out of their weapons towards the newly refined Pesterbot. By the time each of them had emptied their magazines and the smoke cleared, they realized to their terror that the robot was now bulletproof.
You have engaged in an act of violence against Doom Master 1370, Master of all Doom.
It announced in a new voice, one far deeper and more imposing than its previous tinny candor. Now it was a modulated electronic sound, far befitting its new look.
Prepare to face consequences. Retaliating.
With that, the robot leaped into battle with all the grace and ferocity of a wild cat. The nearest security guard barely had a chance to reload his weapon, raising his hands in a weak attempt at a block before the strike from a metallic fist knocked the wind out of him. Moving with balletic speed and precision, Pesterbot swiped and chopped at the guard, each hit connecting painfully with one of the man's vital pressure points, like it was a highly trained hand-to-hand fighter. When the officer collapsed, unable to move save for letting out screams of excruciating pain, the robot turned to face its remaining targets. "Freeze!" one of the Foundation security yelled, raising his pistol with shaking hands. Zipping forwards, SCP-1370 grabbed the gun and wrenched it from the man's fingers, tearing the weapon apart like it was made of cardboard. Ripping the man by his SCP Foundation uniform, it launched him directly upwards, sending his body crashing through the ceiling, leaving a human-shaped hole above. Chunks of building materials rained down on the robot, including wiring and internal lengths of cable that ran through the walls and ceiling that were now exposed. As the security team retreated, SCP-1370 curiously reached up and gripped one of the electric cables, wrenching it out of the ceiling to examine it closer, causing sparks to shower. Pesterbot's new, sleek metallic skin seemed to react to the metal in the wiring, drawing out the copper that channeled electricity throughout the Foundation facility. It was more than a force of magnetism. It was something else. Ideas. SCP-1370 was learning, adapting, and most frightening of all, coming up with new ways to complete its purpose. Marching up to the nearest wall, it pulled back a metal fist and sent it slamming through paintwork and plaster to draw out the metal running through the building. Outside in the corridor, the lights died. In fact, the entire facility lost its power and plunged into darkness until the backup emergency lights activated, filling the Foundation's corridors with low-level blood-red light. More security officers had mobilized outside of the Clockworks room, expecting at any moment that the refined version of the previously harmless Pesterbot would soon appear. Sure enough, it did, and the red lighting was soon added to by yet another hail of frightening gunfire. But now, it seemed SCP-1370 had learned how to shoot back. An arc of lightning zapped through the corridor, electrifying every guard it touched and reducing them to little more than a smoldering husk. A second one followed, striking one guard with a bolt of blue electricity that then leaped from his body to the officer standing next to him, who had been close enough to touch his fallen comrade, and who was, of course, wearing plenty of conductive metal. The wiring in the walls, the electricity. SCP-1370 had learned how to weaponize it, and that wasn't all. As the robot stepped out of the room, it had pulled various other metalwork from the fabric of the building around it into its form, adding to its body in new and gruesome ways. Its shoulders now had additional armor. Long poles of rebar now extended out of its robotic forearms to act as crude, rudimentary impaling weapons. It had gotten even taller, and all forged out of metal it harvested from its surroundings. SCP-1370 hadn't just been made a better fighter, it had been given something else by SCP-914: intelligence. The capacity for it to learn and perpetually adapt itself. And it wouldn't stop. It would keep improving itself to enact its original purpose, to fight anything and everything around it. A slaughter ensued. Everything the SCP Foundation threw at this new version of the Pesterbot only gave it more weapons and more offensive capabilities to add to its growing arsenal. The rebar weapons in its arms were replaced with sleek, sharp blades. Even bullets fired at it seemed to be absorbed into its mass, allowing it to keep growing. SCP-1370 was unstoppable, obliterating everyone that came to desperately try to contain it. And as it bested every opponent, left them decimated and defeated, something new happened to the robot. It couldn't feel emotions, just like with any automaton. It lacked the level of human cognition and complexity to respond to things with feelings. But as it killed more and more Foundation staff left and right, annihilating everything in its path, SCP-1370 experienced something. Not an emotion, but whatever the closest robotic equivalent to pure, unbridled happiness was. Satisfaction of the machine, now able to complete the function it was originally built for, yet had failed at for so long. Getting bigger and bigger, adapting and adding more machines to itself, eventually SCP-1370 was a hulking behemoth. Cars and their combustion engines all became part of the robotic giant, every new piece of technology it encountered becoming a deadly weapon. And as Pesterbot started to tower over buildings, a huge-scale robotic threat, the Foundation had no choice. It was time to deploy another big bad bot to cut SCP-1370 back down to size. It was time to send in the Dragon Slayer. Now go check out What If SCP-096 was put inside SCP-914, where the Shy Guys refined into, well, you'll have to click and see. And SCP-914, what did you put in it? To see what happened when we opened up the Clockworks to you, the fans.